Eric Friday. Thank you, everybody. Curiosity is an inescapable part of living a creative life. It is my start to every journey, a constant companion, and has led me down many trails. Today I want to tell you a little bit about my story, how I've used my 5 senses to explore creative adventures and to keep myself open to curiosity as guidance. I am an environmental graphic designer, drawing from architecture, interiors, graphics, and others to create unique and distinctive spaces. When I was young, I had no idea I'd end up doing this. I only knew I wanted to explore and create. This journey started when I was a curious, fearless kid. So around 1978 in Chicago, I had an epiphany. This is the Marina City Towers, and my uncle Myron was the structural engineer for this project. The building was at the time one of the tallest concrete structures in the world, and he was responsible for the formwork design and the mechanism to remove the formwork for this project. Around the same time, my cousin Dan taught me how to draw a 2-point perspective. I had never drawn anything like that before, so I did this edit to kind of celebrate that event. And it became pretty clear to me at that point that I wanted to explore and create. So I was a precocious little kid. I was born the summer solstice of '66, so you can do the math on my age. My father was a salesman and my mother was a homemaker. Day to day, I was largely unsupervised. I rode a huffy Thunder Road, and I had lots of emergency room visits. And of course, the favorite book is Curious George. I was pretty much into everything. My aesthetics started to develop when I was younger, but as a boy, I was a typical boy interested in baseball cards and beer can collecting, and some of you might recognize the G.I. Joes. Played a lot of video games, read Mad Magazine. And as I got older, my aesthetic just got older. I was interested in girls and cars and architecture, music. And my mother worked at the Cincinnati Nature Center, so we always had Charlie Harper prints around the house, so that was my first introduction to graphics. So curiosity and creativity, is there a connection? Some say by following our curiosity instead of our passions is the real key to an interesting and creative life. And this approach can lead to creativity because it enables us to lean into uncertainty, opening our minds to new ideas, skills, and ways of solving problems. Curiosity has also been found to be just as important as intelligence in order to succeed and navigate in our increasingly complex world. My inherent curiosity has led me to so many different paths and experiences. Of course, all these essentially cross over, but from opportunity to challenges and growth to my favorite territory of the unknown, where you can never know what will happen along the way, what relationships you'll develop, what problems you'll solve, the new surprises you'll discover, and the failures you will experience, which is of course something that will make you stronger in the end. Some believe that the straight and narrow path is the best, the most appropriate, and often safe, but this wasn't the path that chose me. It looked a little bit more like this. And each one of these little nodes represents where I decided to take an intentional turn to see what happens so far. So what happened along the way? So I live in Boulder now, but in the beginning, I was born in Ironton, Ohio, but we actually lived, I was born in Ashland, Kentucky, but we actually lived in Ironton, Ohio. My parents were not confident with the hospital, so they went across the river. Ended up in Cincinnati, and my father, as a salesman, we took a hiatus to Springfield, Illinois, and then back to Cincinnati. I studied architecture at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Did a semester abroad in Luxembourg. And then I got my first job in Chicago. And from Chicago, where am I? Back to Boulder, with Boulder for the first time. And then we moved east, to Baltimore. See, I'm even lost. And then west to Southern California. That was an experiment. And then east again, sort of, back to Boulder. And there's a timeline that's part of this. I graduated with a degree in environmental design from Miami University, which was actually architecture, and was feeling awesome and inspired to take on the world. But my first 2 years were just a giant kick in the ass, curiously cycling through 7 different design positions in 24 months. Clearly, I hadn't found my place yet. It was those following years where I started to develop some tangible experience, combining multiple design disciplines from mixed-use, commercial, and residential architecture to interiors and eventually, and thankfully, branding, environmental graphic design, and wayfinding. It was a true multidisciplinary journey, all fueled by my curiosity, way too much coffee, and maybe a little ADD. So along that time period of new experience, I got a chance to work on some pretty nice projects. From the Interpretive Center at Mount Rushmore, I worked on the Colorado's Ocean Journey project here in Denver, concept retail stores, Tweeter Audio and Red Wing Shoes. Center bottom is the City Center DC project in Washington, DC. And bottom right is Designopolis, a design center not unlike the Merchandise Mart in Cairo, Egypt. And then the Roosevelt Collection in Chicago, the 360 Mall in Kuwait, the Sands Casino and Resort in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And the center project, I was on the team designing the boulevard experience for the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. So I really got a chance to work on some nice things. But now I have my own little shop called Findustry, where I've been a solopreneur designer for the past 7 years, offering up a smattering of services, from visioning and storytelling, branded identity and collateral, pattern and palette development, which you'll see is one of my primary skills, integrated branding, ideographics and pictograms, and signage and wayfinding. And this is my little studio, and it's about the size of an IKEA cube, so you can imagine how small it is. So I wish I had said this first instead of Albert, but it's really true. Aside from my formal architectural training, I'm largely self-taught, building up a kind of toolkit, or superpowers as my friend Diane Riggs from Creative South likes to refer to them as, in order to go about this journey I've been on. And it's been largely due to my curiosity and love of design and problem solving. So be warned, the following part of the show is really going to be a sip from the proverbial fire hose, but it's representative of my desire to not be a specialist, but a generalist. So I used to think graphic design was just about logos, and I've done my fair share. And almost always these identity projects translate into some kind of collateral or signage elements. The Elbe is the river that runs through Hamburg, and this identity is for a local shopping project nearby, and it's inspired by the hard lines and orthogonal qualities of the local shipping ports. This is a collateral piece for an outer space themed retail project in Istanbul called Marmara Park. And along the way, we even got a chance to write and illustrate a graphic novel to share the project with potential investors before it was actually built. Loom is also a retail project in Bielefeld, and the identity and this piece of print collateral was definitely inspired by the town's historical textile industry. And then again, oftentimes these identity pieces are translated into signage and marketing efforts. I had the chance to do an identity for my friend Vince Cobb in Boulder, Colorado. He owns Akamai, which is a personal care line, and developed the packaging. This is a niche project. It's an identity for equestrian journals. Promotional buttons for a Louisville, Colorado-based band called Sound Travels. And some early Findustry drop studies rolled into a toy design competition that was sponsored by the Ello founders, Todd Berger and Lucian Floor. And a neon sign celebrating the life of my first dog, Katie. Okay, pattern and palette development. So I split my time between Hamburg and Boulder, and one of my primary roles at ECE, the group that I work with, is doing branding and graphics with their in-house interiors team for shopping projects. ECE is one of the largest European shopping development companies, and I've had the chance to work with them for about 7 years now, doing graphics and branding. And as if shopping projects aren't inherently chaotic enough, one of my primary jobs at ECE is to add more, let's call it good chaos, with patterning, graphics, signage, and other elements that help create a complete immersive branded environment. The intention is to create an environment where people want to stay, linger, spend lots of money, and enjoy their experience. So these are swatches of typical patterns that I develop for these projects. And oftentimes these patterns are realized in large format print graphics inside the spaces. This is actually in Milaneo, Stuttgart. It's a retail project that I worked on a few years ago, and an Instagram friend of mine is a professional photographer who shoots his dog, and he actually photographed his dog in front of one of my graphics and sent me these on Instagram, so I thought that was kind of cool. But this is a pretty typical application. In these retail projects, there are large light wells and void spaces that kind of connect the different levels of the shopping projects. And normally these surfaces would just be white gypsum board or drywall, maybe a color or something. And ECE's format is to add graphics in these types of spaces. And when the graphics start to look tired or dated, they just take them down and put up new graphics. So it's a nice format. This is Marmara Park in Istanbul. Unfortunately, as we're developing these patterns and palettes, lots of times the graphics can be kind of manifested in different ways. So in this case, some of the patterns for this project in Istanbul were turned into openings in the ceiling for lighting treatments. So the pattern sort of realizes itself on the ceiling, but there's concealed lighting behind it. This is Milaneo, Stuttgart again, but this section has this beautiful, very inexpensive LED light curtain on the ceiling. So the graphics were intentionally black and white, and it has like sort of a digital pixelated sort of quality, and there's a spot varnish on all the lines of the graphics, so the LED light sort of hits those and animates the space. For Mittelrhein is a project in Koblenz, Germany, and that particular area, the Eifel region, has a highly dormant volcanic activity, and it's a wine growing region because of the fertile soil. So we did this, we had this idea of developing this graphic that sort of looked like a cross section through the earth, showing all the different strata and layers through a gradation across the graphic so that it felt like it went from cool to hot, sort of representing the Earth's surface in the center of the Earth. And then what was going to be a very clean, almost Apple Store-like crisp environment, we intervened the spaces with these graphics blown up at large scale, which really sort of transformed the environment. And when you're in the center of the project, you're at the hottest part of the project where the red and orange coloration is. But as you move through the project, you know that you're at the entrance of the project when it starts to get cooler. This is a project in Berlin where I just did some custom tile work, and so it was exciting to see the patterns not just printed out as wallpaper. Okay, so ideographics and pictograms. These are traditionally used for wayfinding, but sometimes for product descriptions, and I do a lot of these. This is for the Mall of Egypt. These icons were a fun project to do. This is for a mixed-use project in Chengdu in China, and each one of them were representative of in either a feature or amenity of the project or a space, and they were used for promotional purposes and directional information icons. Akamai, again, the personal care product that I told you about from Boulder. These are product info icons talking about non-allergenic or unisex or biodegradable or gluten-free, things like that. And this was a concept for an ice cream food truck. But again, this is typically the way the icons are used, especially in ECE projects, creating a little bit more of an enhanced experience going down customer corridors to the restroom facilities. So signage and wayfinding is also part of what I do often, not so much for ECE projects, but I've done quite a number of them. This is the Sands Casino and Resort in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where the Bethlehem steel plant was. The burners were shut down years ago, but they're redeveloping the entire project. Fortunately, salvaging a lot of the vintage buildings, and there is a casino there, but So we had to do our best with this, but the quality of the signage was obviously inspired by the sort of industrial quality of the site. Behind, on the right-hand image is the parking structure, but it's meant to feel like it's part of the blast furnace, and there's a warm light burning out of the space to kind of make you, remind you of all the history of the site. And again, I got a chance to design the largest letter form that I know of, 35 feet high. And it's mounted on the original ore crane that they renovated on the site. This ore crane used to move raw ore from one part of the site to the other, and they cleaned it up and kept it as an entry element. But signage can come in the forms of window graphics or smaller corporate signage, large format neon signage. This is the Roosevelt collection again in Chicago, and these elements were inspired by the trusses of the elevated trains. Skyline Plaza is a new retail project in Frankfurt, Germany. Holsten Gallery is in Neumünster in northern Germany near Hamburg, and this region is where the Holsten horses are bred, so the identity was inspired by the horse sort of equestrian jump. And this is Loop 5 in Dusseldorf, and it's a retail project that was built on an abandoned airport. So there's a lot of signage there. Creative distractions. We all need outlets to break during our personal design process. I'm an ultra runner, so I spend lots of times in the mountains running, and this is where I tend to sort out many of my issues and design problems. But more often, I'll take breaks from regular design process and kick into what I call creative distractions. Almost always a tangent of a real design problem, or also little noodlings that are related to the day, the hour, or the minute. In addition to sharing real work, these distractions also provide good social media content for me. So they all usually start as images that I photograph or sometimes find during an image strategy session. Then I begin the process of manipulating them or adding graphic overlays or interventions just to see what happens. And sometimes it might be about a TV show that I'm watching, or a cool motorcycle that I saw on the side of the road, or a place that I visited, or whatever's going on in my brain, or if I just watched a Black Mirror episode. This project is actually a pretty recent project called Adagio in Verona, Italy, and I did the parking structure graphics. And I was really inspired by the Martini Racing series during the 50s, and I just stopped what I was doing, paid work, and started doing something that was unpaid work and created this guy. And along with these photo edits, because I developed patterns and graphics that are always used at such a large scale, I started doing these little stamp projects inspired by this really talented English designer, Dwayne Dalton. And I started to apply graphics to basically the extreme opposite size format, and that's stamps. And in some cases, treating these stamps as commemorative gestures, which they often are, to the overabundance of unfortunate events that have been happening in our country and the world. And We Do Not Exist has just become this name that I've been using as a way to deal with all these tragedies, but in a celebratory and artistic way. And sometimes the gestures are mildly political or used to make an artistic statement about an event. The one on the left is when we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Far right is obviously the floods in Texas and Louisiana. I think we can figure out what's going on in the center there. And then, because of my fascination with Strava and my obsession with Strava, I started making these stamps that basically just celebrated my own personal fitness challenges that I would self-initiate. Okay, the Sagamore Story. From a professional standpoint, the following combination of two projects truly represents the culmination of my curiosity, drive to learn and grow as a designer, and to reach some real career goals. This showed me that beyond all the great experience with the European retail shopping work, I was able to take what I've learned to a new and highly sophisticated level, of which I'm very proud. These projects also represent the efforts of a highly successful collaboration between myself and my good friends at Ashton Design, located in Baltimore. So this is Kevin Plank, and he is the CEO of Under Armour. And that Under Armour logo, it does not look like that. This is a classic example of one of my curiosities build up to land the ultimate client. So Kevin Plank lives on Sagamore Farm. And Sagamore Farm used to be owned by the Vanderbilt family, and it's in rural Baltimore. And at Sagamore Farm, he breeds thoroughbred racehorses, and he also distills rye. And the water for the rye comes from this property, Sagamore Spring. So there's this beautiful story that's happening already. The Sagamore Pendry Hotel, located in Baltimore and Fells Point, is one of Kevin Plank's new latest and greatest projects. So the Under Armour headquarters is across the harbor, across from Fells Point, and for years Kevin Plank had been staring at this building. This is the Recreation Pier building located in Fells Point, and I think he was pretty upset with the way the building had become broken down and not maintained. It actually sat vacant for about 15 years. And this is what he looks at today. It's a luxury 128-room adaptive reuse overwater hotel in the heart of Fells Point. The head house of the building, formerly known as the Recreation Pier or Rec Pier, is an iconic landmark that stood vacant for about 15 years. The brick Beaux-Arts building originally stored port cargo. So this is an original image of the facade of the building. And then behind it was the port cargo storage area. And they actually created a recreation area for all the influx of immigrants that had come to Baltimore at that time. So they had basketball courts and things to do up on that surface. It was a really interesting mix of functions of this project. And it was pretty run down when they started working on the project. This to the right is the entry into the formal ballrooms. And then you can see on the left how the port storage area was pretty damaged and it was sinking into the harbor. So they spent a lot of money to shore up the back part of the project to allow for the hotel suites. So the concept on this project was gritty beauty. And all of these sort of inspiring attributes were clearly the Battle of Fort McHenry and Francis Scott Key's Stars and Stripes and the Star-Spangled Banner, the industrial kind of quality of the structure itself, and of course the sort of maritime feeling of Fells Point. So this is the way the facade looks now. And the historical commission were very tight on what we could do on the facade of the building. So everything needed to feel established. So the project is called the Sagamore Pendry, and the story behind that is that Kevin Plank is very good friends with Michael Firstman, who is the CEO of the Pendry Hotel Company located in San Diego, and they're a boutique hotel. They have about 4 projects now, and Kevin and Michael were really good friends and decided to blend their brands together and create this boutique experience. So the very first touch point sets up the story. When you walk into the front doors of the project, the handles of the doors are leather wrapped, and you're instantly greeted with this large illuminated wall, and you're kind of like, what is that? And as you get a little bit closer, you see that they're actually words. And then as you get closer, you recognize that they're the 4 verses of the Star-Spangled Banner. This is all made of blackened steel and materials that felt like they belonged in the project from the very beginning. And as you turn the corner from the Star-Spangled Banner wall, you're greeted with this long corridor of dark wood. And along the corridor are 9 icons that are quintessential to the Baltimore experience. From Edgar Allan Poe to the Baltimore flag, to the anchor, to the raven, a crab, Baltimore Oriole baseball player, and the star from the Stars and Stripes. And they're all made of polished cut brass and layered. And then you hit the simple reception desk. And as you get closer, we designed this little, we call it a word trophy. And everything had to be designed so that it worked with whatever material it was touching. And I'll talk about the interior designer in a moment, but this was polished brass on a piece of agate. And then the concierge signage is blackened steel on onyx. So Patrick Sutton Interiors did the interior concept for the project, and Patrick and his office is doing some really fantastic work all around the country and the East Coast. He's a really talented designer and a good friend, and we were really appreciative to have been able to work with him. So we wanted to make sure that everything that we did really met his expectations. He described all of our signage elements as little jewels to the project. So this is the kind of vibe and feeling inside the space. On the right is a whiskey bar where they serve the rye that Kevin Plank distills. So as far as an influence for signage, we definitely were inspired by all of the patterning that Patrick developed for the screens and the elevator doors and things like that. All the directional signage was polished brass and black and steel combination. We set them on a horizontal bar so that all the letter forms read perfectly, and directional signage and the arrows were also drawn from those patterns that were on the elevator doors. So we picked up the little arrows and everything just sort of felt like it belonged with each other. So where the recreation pier above used to live is now an open courtyard. We didn't design this sculpture, but there's a funny story behind it. This is a Colombian sculptor named Fernando Botero, and Kevin Plank actually has this exact sculpture on his property at Sagamore Farm, and the deal was that he was going to donate that to the project, and at the last minute he freaked out and didn't want to give it up, so they had another one commissioned and lowered it in during the construction process with a giant crane. So it's the feature element in the courtyard space, open air courtyard space, and the hotel suites are on both sides, and those hotel suites have harbor views and courtyard views. And then the rooms, which look amazing, I haven't had a chance to see it in person yet, all sort of have this quality of being inside a luxury liner ship. So the signage for the rooms, which were maybe the most expensive room ID signs I've ever done, about $1,000 a piece, were forged of mechanical chattered blackened steel and layered polished brass and bronze, and there was like a 10-part step to this signage element, but they felt that sort of maritime ship-like quality. So do a great job for a big client, and you're positioned well to land another one. Sagamore Spirits, also owned and run by Sagamore and Kevin Plank, is reviving the Maryland rye whiskey heritage. So we got another job. This is in Port Covington in Baltimore, very near Fells Point, and Kevin Plank decided to develop the Sagamore Spirit Distillery and Visitors Center. And people can come here and have a really nice meal at the restaurant. The food is all paired with different ryes, and you can watch the distilling process. And I don't know exactly how he's doing this, but somehow he's bringing the water from the springs at Sagamore Farm to this property. So we were charged with doing directional signage and visitors arrival signage for the project. Architecturally, it has a sort of modern farmhouse type quality that was picked up from Sagamore Farm. So the building on the right is the distillery building, and the building on the left is the visitor center area. The entry signage is a giant piece of bent Corten steel with punched 3 diamonds, which is the classic Sagamore logo that just had to go everywhere. I'm like, no more diamonds, but just punched everywhere. And then the materials were as if you found the materials on the site. It was an industrial site, it's right on the water. It was an urban blight area that's obviously come a long way, and the whole area is being redeveloped. So everything, again, had to feel like it belonged in the site and just made sense with the connection to the architecture. And this is a nighttime shot of the entry, and then we hired an illustrator to do sort of vintage, like rural barn building graphic that sort of celebrates the kind of hipster distillery sort of quality of the project. Okay, so a few takeaways, you guys. Refuse to set limits. This is what I did, and this way you'll be constantly surprised and grow. Flexibility is key. Don't stiffen up. Expect to change gears often. Embrace creative distractions. I think this is where the magic can happen. Ask questions always. In most cases, you are working for the client. It's not about you, it's about them. And grow. From speaking engagements to listening to podcasts to taking Skillshare classes, learn new tools and keep learning to get back in touch with our childlike curiosity. I'd really like to thank Creative Mornings for having me today, and especially Ello. They've been an incredible support and social network community for creatives, and I would encourage all of you to check them out if you don't already know about them. And to let you know, they're also sponsoring a giveaway with some of my original pieces. So if you'd like to sign up, go check out Ello. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.